Sponsored by Brilliant. So people who may not be familiar with you, you actually started at Apple with OS X, and it's true that you stayed there roughly until Steve Jobs found out that you were working from Ireland?
That's pretty much exactly what happened, except I stayed 1 year later than that because everybody just agreed to tell Steve that I had moved over to California when in fact I hadn't.
The last time Apple introduced widgets for iOS, it was in the Today view, and you famously immediately went out and shoved an entire calculator into them.
Which went perfectly, and there was no complications at all with that.
Oh, I mean, like, technically, I think Apple just didn't anticipate that anybody would be able to do that, not really understanding, not having the maximum respect for the kind of skill set that you were bringing to bear on this.
Yeah, I mean, there was a brief conversation, shall we say, with App Review, and PCalc, the Today widget, could live on, and it's lived on for 6 years, and surely nothing could happen now.
So the reason I'm talking to you right now, though, is that Apple introduced a whole new type of widgets this year at WWDC. They took the complications from the Apple Watch and, using the might and mystery that is SwiftUI, have propagated them across all of their platforms for good, because they are way better looking, they're way more informationally dense, they're way more glanceable, but also maybe a little bit for ill because they're way less interactive. And I was hoping that maybe you could walk us through what you see as the major differences first.
As you say, they're a lot more similar to watchOS complications than they are to the old widgets. And the old widgets were indeed mini apps. And as everyone was very keen to point out in the sessions, these widgets are not mini apps.
Did you feel attacked? Did you feel attacked or seen? I don't know which one.
I mean, I don't think Apple makes any decisions really thinking about me personally. I did take it slightly personally, but I realized that is not aimed at me. I'm just like collateral damage alongside. So it's the way that they work is that they are basically, if you can think of them as pictures for the most part, like it's a static image that can be updated over time, like a complication, and can have, in certainly the larger forms of them, they can have some interactivity. Like when you tap on one, you can open a URL, which will open your app, and you can deep link into various parts of your app. So say you have, your listing, like the music one has like a list of the most recently listened to albums.
Yeah.
And if you tap on the particular one, it could take you to that album. But what it can't do is it can't do anything in place. So you can't have a button which when you click on it, some state is changed and then the widget updates. It will always open up the app. And what that discounts is any form of calculator.
Yeah.
Because you're not allowed to basically have buttons that just do something. And the reason for that, I think, is quite a sensible one, in that these things are built for energy efficiency and performance above interactivity. So you can have them like right there when you pick up your phone and you look at the phone, like the comment about, people pick up their phone and look at it 90 times a day or something. And those little widget areas will be on display, and you might not want to be spinning up a little process in the background every time you pick up your phone. And I can understand and I can respect that as a design decision for these things. I think it's going to rule out a number of widgets that people have liked.
Yeah.
Not just PCalc. PCalc, I think, is the extreme example because it's a fully interactive little app. But there are some other things where you might want to check off items in a to-do list.
Set multiple timers.
Set timers, those kind of things where light interactivity would have been nice, that you could do something without bouncing out to your main app. But, I think they decided that the trade-offs were just, it was too dangerous to open that door even just an inch because they knew people like me would be in there in a second.
So for the interactivity that they're that there is. There's small, medium, and large complications. And on the medium and large ones, I think you can have multiple deep links. So for example, if it's a small complication and you tap it, it'll just take you to your stocks. But if it's a large complication that shows you several stocks, tapping each of those stocks could take you to the page for that stock.
Yeah, so what you do is you basically set a URL which will cover the whole widget. And only in the medium and large ones, you can use these link objects in SwiftUI, and you can assign a specific URL for each of the different ones. And that, that gives you most of the functionality you would need to like open up a specific note or go to a specific album or something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've had this long philosophical debate about the home screen. Apple's always treated it not as a destination, but as a portal. And they just never really wanted you hanging around there. They wanted you to use it to go into and out of apps. And widgets have always lived off in widget space in the today view, which you had to swipe in and out. And there you could sort of do your you could do your calculator, you could do your to-dos. But now that they're on the home screen, they're sort of living more under that philosophy where you can look at them, but if you want to interact with something, you're being teleported straight back into an app.
I mean, that is certainly one argument. That one thing that kind of is a flaw in that is up to now, you could pin your widgets on an iPad home screen and they were there all the time.
You had a brief year of joy with that.
Yes. And I mean, it also looks like the existing widgets are probably going to live on for maybe a year or something. Like the underlying APIs all have big signs on them saying, don't use these anymore. So maybe there'll be another year of them, and maybe they will think about sort of interactivity as something that they can, if they could do it like in iOS 15 or something like that, it would be nice.
So that was going to be my next question to you, because we've seen several times that Apple is willing to tear things down completely and then rebuild them back up, even if the building process takes time. Like, Final Cut Pro, the iWork apps. The iWork apps specifically, they tore down the old, Mac versions, rebuilt them off the iOS engine. They were missing a bunch of features, and over time they've been adding those back. So do you think it's possible, and obviously anything is possible, but do you hope it's possible that Apple tore down the old widget structure to bring over everything they liked about complications, and that over time, now that they have this new core, they'll rebuild some of the layers that we enjoyed on the more functional iOS and macOS widgets?
The way that that they are done as complications effectively, and you have these timelines, and you sort of, the idea is, if say you're a calendar app, you can sort of work out what your widget is going to look like throughout the whole day and just dump all that information into the widget architecture, and then it'll sort of update gradually as the day goes. And then, I mean, you can in your app, you can update the timeline and say, oh, something's changed, like somebody's added a new event, so we can go back and we can regenerate these things. But the philosophy behind them is very much the sort of do as little work as possible. And I'm not sure how they could get from that point to the point of, say, a calculator. Everything is possible.
Yeah, fair.
And maybe they could introduce a sort of a slightly different way of doing it, or something. If I had to take bets on it, I would say they won't.
So you mentioned how the widgets update, and I think that's something that people aren't entirely clear off. My understanding is it works off a timeline, and they will update periodically to reflect more current information. So if it's a calendar, for example, it'll update to show you what your next event is. But if you have something in the series, in the Smart Stack, I keep calling it Siri Smart Stack, but I think they just call it Smart Stack, and an event is coming up, they can set a priority as well, saying, hey, I'm super important, I'm more important than other things. And then depending on how high they make that priority, the things in the Smart Stack can fight for what's going to be shown to you next, or what's going to be on top of the stack.
Yeah, I think the example they gave for that was like, your stocks might be more important while the stock market is open. So, there's no point showing them after hours. So you could decrease the priority on those. Or, if you have an event coming up at a certain time, maybe you would raise the priority for that thing. It will be interesting to see, like if everybody just says, my thing is the most important thing, What will the smart stack do at that point?
Fighting for stack dominance.
I mean, there's some strange things with the widgets. Like currently, you can't mix them in with the iPad home screen, which to me makes less sense.
When I asked Apple about it, their answer was that the iPad was a fundamentally different experience, especially now that they've given us iPad OS. But I always get the feeling that any development work is constrained by money and time, and Apple is not that constrained by money, but boy, are they still constrained by time.
Oh yeah, I mean, given like what the conditions that all of this stuff have been made in for the last, 3 or 4 months, like everybody working from home or whatever, I think it's amazing the amount of stuff that we did get out of this WWDC. And, if there are a few rough edges or things that don't look quite finished yet, that's not a surprise, really.
So no spoilers, of course, but do you already have an idea in mind for what you're going to do with PCalc widgets?
Because these are meant to be a sort of more glanceable display of information, though, I think there's a class of apps that it's not really going to work as well for, but there are some that it's going to work very well for. And that's just the hand of Craig Federici on your shoulder guiding you in the direction that Apple wishes you to go.
So the one thing that I've liked a lot so far is the Siri Suggestion ones, because when you drop those in, they become indistinguishable from your normal home screen apps. And over time, over the last few years, Apple's gotten really good in actually predicting the kind of apps that I want to use next. And I've got 2 of them on my main home screen now, which is I thought would be weird because I'm very much about spatial awareness and object permanency, and I want my apps where I want them, but I could just never fit enough apps. And then the folders were 2 taps, and that's just a tap too much. 2 taps is a tap too much. And now I've got 4 rows of Siri Suggestions, and it does take me a second to spot the icon that I want at any given time, but it's almost always right there. And that to me has been transformational in a way I didn't expect it would when I just heard that Apple was updating widgets.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. I think there's other stuff where I think people will innovate around the edges and figure out things that they can do. And I think there's going to be some little holes where I can launch a URL. What does that let me do?
Yeah.
It might, I think probably you could run a shortcut from just that. You could run a shortcut just by opening a URL, and that wouldn't launch your app. So is that a way to do something interesting? I mean, the fact that the same code runs between iOS and Mac is also nice, because that means you've got one less completely different way of doing things to target. And that's certainly something I'm looking at going forward. It reduces a lot of friction in doing stuff. Stuff like that I think is good.
Powering all of this, everything that sci-fi calls artificial intelligence, AI, is really machine learning. And to learn more about that, check out Brilliant's new Neural Networks course. Here's an example from something that we're just going to keep seeing more and more of. You can wire up just 50 neurons, and using that type of feedback, build a network that's capable of classifying handwritten digits. But really, recognizing and classifying almost everything eventually. Whether you're a student looking to get ahead while school's out, a professional who wants to brush up on cutting-edge topics, or someone who just wants to understand, maybe even be part of how all this technology is changing the world, check out Brilliant. Go to brilliant.org/Rene Ritchie and sign up for free. And the first 200 of you can also level up with 20% off the annual premium subscription.